taking these old deck boards from a deck that I tore out and replaced to make a custom work table that I can use inside and outside the shop. So what I have are 9 2x8s. They're just under 8 feet long, and as you can see, the ends are pretty rough, which is fine. I'm going to be cutting the ends of them off, and I'm actually only going to be using about 6 feet of the lumber out of those little less than 8 foot boards. And then these are 2x10s. These were actually step plates from the deck, and as you can see, the ends on some of these also are in pretty rough shape. There again, I'm only going to be using the better part of the center of the boards. And what I'm kind of looking forward to with this project is using something that would otherwise end up in a landfill. Most of the time when a deck is torn out and replaced, the lumber that comes out of it, if it's salvageable at all, it ends up in a dump. And when I tore this deck out, I didn't know at the time what I was going to do with the lumber, but I just hated to see it go to waste when it could be used for something useful down the road. So I held on to it, and I'm glad I did, because now I have the perfect project in mind. I don't have a lot of fancy wood shop tools. I do have a nice rigid table saw, and I also have a decent compound miter saw, but I don't have a joiner, I don't have a planer. And another issue with these boards, even if I did have a joiner or a planer, I probably wouldn't want to use it, because although I went through and removed as many of the nails and screws as I could, a lot of the screws, especially on the top edge of the boards, where the floor was fastened to the floor joists, a lot of those screws were rusted, they twisted off. So there are still screws in at least one edge, one of the long edges of these boards. And as you look, you can see the holes where the floorboards were attached. Well, not every one of those holes is clean. So what I'm going to do, the way I'm going to use these, is I'm probably going to rip them down either to 3.5 or 3 inches wide, and I'm going to take my cuts out of the middle where there are no screws. And I've gone through each board and carefully inspected it, and there are no screws running down the middle. So that's my game plan, is to have my nice finished edge, or the top of my workbench, will come out of the middle of the boards. That's going to be the boards that we're going to laminate for the top. And I'm going to go ahead and cut them to length before I laminate them, so I'll have less to do after it's one solid piece. And then the ones that I have left over, along with the short boards that are all ripped as well, that's going to make up my legs and my runners, all the bracing in between the legs. To the third board in on both sides, and I went ahead and cut out a 4.5 inch block to make my mortise. And then when I glue everything together, get these all laminated together, I'll still have that mortise, and I don't have to go back and cut that out after the fact. So I left 6 inches here, and then took my 4.5 inches out. I take these two boards and then the boards that make up my mortise, and go ahead and clamp those 3 together first, get them glued, clamped, everything spaced properly, and then put them back in to the entire set and glue everything together. give you a rundown real quick of all of our pieces. So we have our top, of course, which at this point is 3.5 inches thick and 24 inches wide, 6 foot long. We have 4 legs, which are basically rough cut. And I'll show you how the pieces go together, but we've got our tenon and our mortise, of course, in the tabletop, and then our 4 legs. Like I said, they're just rough cut. We'll probably have to do a little bit more shaving on these to get everything to lay right. And we have our long stringers to run between the legs on each side, and we have our short stringers to run between the legs on the ends. And the next thing we're going to be doing is test fitting everything and getting it all assembled before we start gluing and permanently fastening it together. But those are your main parts, your main building blocks for the workbench. So you have your top, 4 legs, 2 long stringers, 2 short stringers, and then everything else is glue and screws probably from this point on. There will be one more piece that I'm going to cut when I get to that point, and that's going to be a piece of plywood to make the bottom shelf when this is all assembled. So that's all of the pieces. I have to cut the 2 small stringers to length, but I need to get these laid in exactly where they need to be before I mark those and cut them. I left them about 1 inch long, 1.5 inches long on each end. So we'll get everything fit and then we'll come back. All my parts are now dry fit, so I can see that everything's gonna line up straight and square, which is the most important thing at this point. So now it's time to get some help and take it all apart, glue it up, put it back together, clamp it. So I figured out after we got this all assembled and clamped that I should have done a dry run on the clamping too, because I didn't even have a freaking clue where I needed all the clamps to be until I realized that I had them in the wrong place. So this is what we ended up with. Basically, these pipe clamps are just barely catching the end of these boards. So you can see that. It's not catching it by much, maybe 1/4 inch, if that. But it's just enough to keep it in line with the ends. And then of course the bar clamps going across are holding everything nice and tight this way, keeping everything closed up. So that's what I ended up doing. I kind of had everything in the wrong spot to begin with, but it worked out. So I've got a lot of glue running, which is fine. I'll wait probably about 20-30 minutes and let that set up a little bit, and then I'll come through with my paint scraper and just kind of scrape off the bulk of that glue that's dripping. All right, guys, it's time to put the casters on. So here's the casters that I'm using, and these are 5-inch dual bearing locking casters. All 4 are going to be locking casters. They are, I believe, 400 pounds each, and the combined weight of the 4 is 1,500 pounds. I know that's that math doesn't add up, but that's exactly what the description says, which doesn't really matter because this bench in itself is probably only going to weigh a couple hundred pounds, and the weight of anything else that's added to it won't exceed that, anywhere near that weight. So those are the casters we're putting on. Let's get them on there. You notice I'm doing this while I still have everything clamped up, and that's just because I want to give this more dry time, and it's a good time to go ahead and do some of my finishing touches while I'm waiting on that. So one thing I wanted to show you on these casters, I already have this mounted on, and I'll show you how I'm going to mount those, but you see those teeth in here? They kind of look like a crown. So swivel caster, swivel wheel, when you lock it, it actually locks the swivel on the caster as well as the wheel. So it locks it in both directions, and I really like that because when I get the workbench rolled out to use and I have something setting on there, you know, if the wheel's locked, that helps, but if it swivels, you still get that movement or that motion, and this will greatly reduce any kind of motion while you're using the workbench. Okay, so as far as how I have it mounted down, this one, as you can see, is already mounted down, and what I'm doing, I could use lag bolts, but I have these 3-inch outdoor T25 torque screws that I'm using throughout the project, and I have some small these are small 1/4-inch washers. So what I'm doing is see if I can do this one-handed, putting a washer on each torque screw to kind of distribute the weight. This should be more than enough strength on each one of those casters. If I ever do have an issue, if it's not quite strong enough, I'll take those out and I'll put lag screws in instead. But the holes for the screws are 1/4-inch, so I'm not going to be able to go bigger than a 1/4-inch anyways. And although a lag screw would probably be better, this is what I have, so this is what I'm going to use. That's kind of the whole point of this project, is low budget, using what I have, you know, basic tools without getting too fancy. So I'm finding my placement on the wheels. Basically what I did is I just brought the mounting plate in about 1/4 of an inch from the edge, and that's just to get the screws in far enough where there's plenty of meat to get a hold of. I'm also angling those screws in towards the center of the table just a little bit, just to get into more of the mass of the wood instead of just having the screw, you know, out here close to this outside edge. This thing turned out brilliant. I love it. Super solid, heavy. Those casters are really smooth too, and they're sitting nice. Oh, those casters are great. So the next thing that I'm going to do is use my saw to go ahead and take off the rest of that tenon that's sticking through on the legs. So I need to do that on all 4 legs. And then I'm going to be building myself a router sled and rails so that I can surface the top. Now, I already have a nice professional Craftsman router, and I have this router bit, 1/2-inch mandrel. That should be perfect. I'll be able to take off 2 inches in a pass and level that all off. So I'll do another video on that. But if you're building this for yourself and you're at this point, depending on the purpose you're building it for, this may be where you stop. I'm going to give you guys some dimensions because I know that's one of the first questions I'm going to get asked. So I'll give you some dimensions on what I did, and then of course you can take that and modify it however you want. Get you some dimensions real quick. Tell you what I did. Now this is, at this point, these are unfinished dimensions, okay? Because I'm still going to be taking some thickness out of the top. So right now, my top is 6 foot long. 24 inches wide, and you can easily change the width of that by how many 2x4s you use. I was actually going to go 3 inches wider, so one more 2x4 on each side, and I decided that might be a bit much because honestly this is plenty. I mean, for the stuff that I do or will be doing, anything bigger than this, especially with my small little one-car garage shop, you know, you run out of space really fast. I mean, as you can see, there's a lot of this clutter is because of this project, but still, you run out of space fast. So I don't want something huge. I just want something that works for my needs and isn't overkill. So, thickness. Right now, and this is just one board, I'd have to measure more of them to get you a better average, but 3 1/4. So I'd say by the time I take the imperfections out of the top, which, tell you what, really, it's not bad. I mean, I could almost take a belt sander and clean the glue off, and it'd probably be good enough for what I'm using. But I've got a couple spots, like right here, that's sticking up a little ways. That last board down here, see that sticking up a little ways. So I've got some boards that I need to take off. And so probably what I'll do, and what that was, is I think those had a flare on the end of them, or the board itself might have had a little bit of a twist or a curve in it. So that's fine. That's kind of what the router sled project will do, is take that curvage out of there. So right now 3 1/4, probably going to take it down to 3 1/8, maybe even 3 inches thickness. All of my legs and the stringers that run between the legs, it's all cut or ripped to 4 1/2 inches wide, all of it. So my stringers, I only went 2 boards thickness on the stringers, and that was just because I was starting to run low on lumber, and I didn't want to try to mess with doing a mortise and tenon on the bottom, so I just went with a lap joint. But my legs are 4 1/2 by 4 1/2, and basically you just have the three 1-bys, or 2-bys rather, sandwiched together to make that 4 1/2, and then so I just matched it on the side that I ripped 4 1/2. I'm going to go outside to outside on the legs, if I can get it hooked here. Okay, so 21 1/4 outside to outside on the ends, and then on the sides, exactly 5 feet. That's outside corner to outside corner. Now, the overall height, that's probably one other thing. So let's check that out real quick. Okay, right now, overall height, 36 1/4. What I wanted was a 36-inch workbench. So by the time I take off what I'm going to take off, that's going to work out almost perfect. The actual legs, I guess if you go from the bottom to the bottom of the table, the legs are 27 inches. And then the casters themselves take up 6 inches. So that, and again, that's a 5-inch caster, but with the swivel part and everything, they take up 6 inches. So there you go on dimensions, guys. And that's going to be it for this video. I'll do another video that will just be doing the sled for the top. Probably do a short part of that video on building the sled, and then the rest of the video will actually be leveling the top and cutting out the shelf for the bottom, which that's really basic. So there you go, guys. I hope if you're building a project like this, if you're going to take on a project like this, trying to build your own workbench, I hope this video helps. If you like it, please like the video, subscribe, and we'll catch you on the next one, guys. Thanks for watching.